topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon, especially to you people in the California area. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show, where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. You know, we do a lot of shows every month, but this show we have for the next 50 minutes, we've actually been bringing this to you for the last couple of years. And it's probably, I don't even know if I've shared this with our expert, but we get more calls from law firms who are watching the show that specialize in the area of mesothelioma and asbestos. And I've never had that before in 17 years of doing this show. Let me welcome to you our great guest, attorney Michael Mandelbrot.
Steve, thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. I'd like to think we are a popular crew of lawyers around the country. We're very altruistic. We like to help people, whether it's disability claims, compensation from asbestos companies, but it's all about asbestos diseases. Those are the people we represent. So thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay and see me okay?
Hear you fine. Michael, I got to tell you that the people who call actually tell us that the advice that you give every month is really good. I mean, these are your peers that are complimenting you on the advice that you give people.
You know, I appreciate the compliments, especially from my peers. There are some very incredible lawyers in my field, really some fantastic lawyers. And so to hear that I'm getting compliments from my peers through your show, Steve, it really is wonderful. So thank you.
Well, it usually, Michael, it usually works the other way around. They're usually calling up and saying, your expert's giving bad advice. You should go with our firm. We would give much, but it's just the opposite. That's why I'm so surprised. Well, I shouldn't be surprised, but I got to tell you, we're just so lucky to have you, Michael. And you know what? I am so proud of myself. After 2 years, I can finally pronounce mesothelioma. I have never been able to say that.
Well, you know something, I've never really, made an effort to correct you, but when I heard you say it earlier in the show today, I said, wow, he's got it. He's got it down. So, yeah.
I am so proud. It took me forever. Because if you look at it, you keep one. Anyway, tell people about your firm, how long you've been around doing this. I think you've got an incredible story of why you're in this area of law.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I've actually, right when I graduated from law school, and I was searching for a job, I got a job with a firm in my hometown who specialized in representing victims of asbestos diseases. At the time, I really didn't even know what asbestos was. I was thrown into the fire very quickly, and what I realized and what I learned was asbestos was a mineral or a fiber that was used in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of products, whether it's construction products, shipyard products, cosmetics, a variety of products. And what these companies didn't tell people was that asbestos caused some very serious diseases. The most serious, of course, being mesothelioma, which is a fatal disease to the lining of the lungs or the abdomen. And I began representing these people some 30 years ago, and it's sort of been my passion ever since. I remain committed to victims of all asbestos diseases. A lot of lawyers around the country only want people with cancer, but we help everybody. Asbestosis, lung cancer, mesothelioma, and a variety of other cancers, colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, that are also caused by exposures to asbestos. So that's a little bit about my background. I will say we've been very successful as well. We've probably recovered over $200 million in the past 30 years for victims of asbestos diseases. We're happy to take a case if we can get somebody a few $1,000s. And of course, if we can get them millions and millions of dollars, we're happy to take the case as well. Most of our clients are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and this compensation, which they deserve, really is important to them. And I've never failed to recognize that.
What is the hardest part about your practice? Because I can see by letters we get, Michael, that first of all, people don't even understand. They also don't, they think they have to come up with a load full of money to pay your fees, which they don't even understand how you charge. And they don't even know if they're a candidate. Those are the kind of questions that we get.
Those are, some good questions. I would say the easiest part of our job is actually the fees, because I've never sent out a bill in 30 years. We only make money as an office if we're able to get money for a client or settlements or compensation from trust funds. And typically that would be 1/3 of the settlements goes to the lawyers or my office, and 2/3 goes to the clients. We don't charge clients for medical records, social security records, other documents that we need in order to work up their cases. We don't typically we don't charge them for the investigation where we mail their medical records to doctors. The only way we get compensated as lawyers is if we're able to get somebody compensation. And unlike other lawyers who are so quick to send out a retainer agreement and a fee contract and demand a retainer, we don't even send out a retainer originally. We investigate a case first. There's no obligation for the client. It is entirely free for the client. And then if we determine that they have a case, then we will send them a retainer or a fee contract, which is always a contingency fee contract. No fee unless we win is the type of thing you might hear on TV from other lawyers who are in a contingency practice like I am. And so that's probably the easiest thing. To be honest, one of the hardest things, and this is going to be, I think, a unique answer, but this seems to come up with me every week, is that many, and has happened hundreds of times, victims from around the country will go to their local doctor, their local physician, the VA, whoever they get medical treatment from. These individuals clearly have an asbestos-related disease, whether it's asbestosis or lung cancer. Typically, if it's mesothelioma, we'll find out eventually. But let's just say they have either lung cancer caused by asbestos or asbestosis, and they go to their local physician. and they've got breathing problems, and they might see something on the doctor might see something on their lungs. It just amazes me how little local physicians know and understand about asbestos diseases. Because anytime, and this happens, it seems like with 99% of my clients, where they go to a doctor with a significant breathing problem or possibly an asbestos disease, and the first question every doctor always asks them is about smoking. And they want to know
Mm.
whether or not they smoked. And did you smoke cigarettes? And were you exposed to chemicals? And were you exposed to fumes? And were you exposed to all of these other things that could, does pleuritis run in your family? Without even asking them about asbestos or determining whether or not asbestos can be involved. So, hundreds and hundreds of times over the years, these people call my office who've had asbestos diseases for years and are eligible for compensation. But when they call us, we have to start from square one because their doctors have told them, well, he smoked, you probably got COPD, which is typically smoking related chronic
Hmm.
obstructive pulmonary disease. So the hardest thing about my job is, first getting people to understand, hey, your doctor might clearly be wrong, and all these problems you're having aren't caused by those 5 years that you smoked, but probably because of those 25 years you worked in the shipyard that your doctor should have known about but didn't even mention. And so that's one of the hard things. Obviously, the other real hard thing is many of our clients expire, pass away from
Yeah.
asbestos related diseases. So I get calls all the time, and I might have talked to someone the previous week, and then I'll get a call from the spouse saying, so and so passed away. And so knowing every time I hang up the phone it could be the last time I speak with my clients, that's never something that's easy or that I've gotten accustomed to. And that's why one line that I always use with clients, and it probably overused, is, what, it's really good to hear your voice, because
Yeah.
I never know when the last time I hear their voice is going to be. So that's one of the toughest parts. But good, very good question, Steve. Thank you.
Michael, people don't realize in the background all the legwork that you have to do, all the research that you have to do. You do so much before you really even realize your first time. But can you explain to people, just kind of go over, what do you go through with a patient? What kind of research do you have to do, background work?
It's a good question, and a perfect example is a client I'm going to meet tomorrow morning, Thursday at 8:30 a.m. It's a 2-hour drive for me. They called me yesterday. Um, a woman, her father died of lung cancer in August. They had reached out to another asbestos firm, unlike my office, who was making them get the medical records and them get all the documents. And they didn't sign up with the other firm, but the other firm was making them get all these records. So they called me. And so they said, my dad died of lung cancer. We don't know exactly where he worked, but he worked in California and Arizona. He worked in the shipyards, and he
Mm.
also had a service station for years, which is still open, where they did brake work on cars. And so, where do I have to go with that? Well, first I've got to determine, so I'm going to go out there and meet with them. I've got to get their medical records, the biopsy to make sure first of all, it is a lung cancer, the pathology report. And then I've got to get his most recent chest x-ray and send it off to a doctor who does understand asbestos-related diseases and see if he's got underlying asbestos disease. If he does have an asbestos cancer, then the real investigation starts. Who are we going to get compensation from? What asbestos companies? So at this point, we don't really know where he worked other than the shipyards and this one gas station. So we will have to order his social security records, which will give us all his employers over the year. If he was in the military, we'll have to order his military records. And once those arrive, maybe 6 weeks later, we've then got to go through those with a fine-tooth comb to determine where he worked and when. Once we have that information, I go back to my database and look at all of these locations to determine what asbestos products were present, who was there, when were these sites built, who built them, what asbestos products were used in the construction, what asbestos brake suppliers were used, for example, at his place, what shipyards did he work at, and then I can determine what ships he worked on and presumably built back in the 40s or 50s. Sorry about that. I meant to get my
That's
phones
okay.
out of here. Then I will have to come up with a list of companies or defendants that we believe we can get compensation from. At that point, and now we're talking, say 3-4 months later, there's two avenues of compensation. There's these very large, or used to be very large, asbestos trust funds. And then there is also, of course, litigating, suing companies that are solvent that we think we can prove a case against. GE, Westinghouse for brakes, companies like Bendix. But then there's lots of those companies, brake companies, for example, that are bankrupt. Ray Bestos Manhattan, Wagner. I think Borg Warner recently may have filed for bankruptcy as well. And so there's a variety of avenues of compensation. And of course, the goal is to get as much money for the client as we can, as much as we possibly can, because we make more as an office. We've got skin in the game in every case.
Yeah.
We want to make, and this is what I actually really do like about my practice is we've got skin in the game in every case. We've got the same incentive as our clients in every single case. 99% of other lawyers, they don't have skin in the game. They're billing by the hour, they're billing by the minute, they're sending, you've got to pay them retainers. That's not me, and that's not us. And that is something I really do appreciate about our practice, and that I know clients very much appreciate as well. As somebody who's had to hire lawyers, there is nothing worse than getting that bill at the end of every month where they're billing for every email, every phone call, every time they pick up the phone, every little bit of research they do. They're billing you for that, not us. That's our time, and we pay for all our time.
Is there a statute of limitations? You were talking about someone you're going to go see tomorrow whose father has already passed away. Is there a statute of limitations?
There is, and it differs in every state. California, when somebody dies, you've got 1 year from date of death to file a lawsuit, a 1 year statute of limitations. Other states have much longer, 2 years from date of death, maybe 3 years. Minnesota has a unique one, 6 years from date of death or diagnosis, whichever is earlier. So in some cases, it might even be like we have a lot of Minnesota clients, it might be 6 years after they passed away. There is something, I say that, and that's for example, in California, it's 1 year after diagnosis. Okay. This person died in August of lung cancer. Nothing on their death certificate says asbestos-related lung cancer. So
Right.
there hasn't even been a diagnosis yet. In California, even though it's 1 year from date of death, which is a hard rule for, say, some trust funds when you have to file claims, for the purposes of the statute of limitations, this person I'm going to meet tomorrow, even though they died in August, the statute of limitations has not started to run yet because there has been no diagnosis of an asbestos related lung cancer. That being said, say this person died 3 years ago, who I'm meeting tomorrow. Still, there's no diagnosis of an asbestos related lung cancer yet. So if I went and got a diagnosis in 2 months for that person who died 3 years ago, their statute arguably still hasn't run, even though it's been a couple of years since they died, because nobody has actually diagnosed them with an asbestos disease. Mesothelioma is defined as an asbestos related cancer. It's the only known cause. So if it's mesothelioma, absolutely 1 year from date of death, a case must be filed. But for these other diseases, we don't know that it's specific. We only know it's lung cancer at this point, given his background and what the daughter has told me. I'm presuming it will be an asbestos disease, an asbestos lung cancer, but it may not. It may not. And, that's the investigation that we have to do in our cases.
I've learned from you that the word shipyard is a red flag, but I've never heard about an automotive or brakes before.
Yeah, especially the old drum brakes that were used, almost exclusively on cars before 1980, but disc brakes had them as well. And asbestos was a very large component because it's, as we call them in the field, friction materials. And so when the brake pad pressed against the metal, it created a lot of heat, obviously. And having asbestos as a component kept the brake pads cool. More asbestos, easier to keep the brake pads cool. There was
Wow.
some cheap substitutes, but not as cheap as asbestos. Why people get exposed to those is because, and I had never done a brake job and I only learned this, but typically when you do a brake job, you use compressed air to blow out the brake assembly, all of the old dust, the brake dust that's in there before you install the new brake pads. Also, as was common, was you would sand down the new brake pads so they weren't slick or they weren't stick. Clearly, using compressed air with asbestos dust, and especially because they'd have to stick their heads right in there, created a lot of exposure. And also the same with the sanding. And there's been a lot of tests done by, we'll call them scientists, who measure the asbestos dust counts from brake sanding and from using compressed air, and it is substantial asbestos exposure. But in addition to that, car, every old transmission car had a clutch, and the clutch disc, like the brake pads, also had asbestos. So over the years, we've represented many, many mechanics, defendants, Ford, Chrysler, GM now has a trust, they're bankrupt, Mercedes, Nissan. I've seen them all in cases over the years. VW, the brake manufacturers, the clutch disc manufacturers. Very common in asbestos cases, that, as we call them, friction cases, which is what they are. Railroad brakes too,
So I've got
friction. Tractor
really
brake,
okay.
all of them, every single one of them. I've seen Caterpillars, very common defendant in these cases. Tractors, railroads, loaders, offload, forklifts, helicopters. We see them all. If they use friction
Wow,
or those types of pads, absolutely. Absolutely.
Michael, I've got one, two, three, four, 8 people who just text us in. They all have the same question, just different part of the country. This is a national show. Can you tell us of these cities or states which about their statute of limitations? Atlanta, Dallas, Sugarland, that's outside of Houston, Memphis, San Antonio, Newark, New York, Seattle. All have the same. I mean, they're different people, all with the same question, wanting to know about statute of limitations.
This is what I can generally tell you. The general rule that it's California has one of the shortest from date of death. I don't know every one of these states, but I am going to give you a couple of states, and I don't know if they came up. Let's use either 2 or 3 years is the general rule that I have seen in states. 3 years being the most common, 2 as well. California the shortest with 1. States with longer statutes of limitations that I've seen include Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. Now, I will say that I don't see a lot of cases in those states. And all of these people who are writing in understand that just because you live in a particular state, it doesn't mean that your case would be filed in that state or that state's statute of limitations would apply. Because where these companies were located is a possible state that we can file your case. And where these companies had their distribution offices is a place we can file these cases. And of course, where your diagnosis was is a place we can file these cases. Pretty much where we can find one good defendant to keep your case in a particular state, we can keep it there. So in every case, we look at it and say, first thing is, in which jurisdiction would it be most valuable? Because in California, for example, we can sue suppliers and manufacturers going back decades. In some of these other states, there's laws that restrict going after these defendants. So the first thing we look at is, which jurisdiction is a case most valuable? And that's why you see 90% of cases around the country, probably 70%, filed in 3 states: California, Illinois, and New York. And I would bet you that 80% of those people don't live in California, Illinois, or New York. Don't There's lots of cases in Florida, Ohio, and a lot of other places as well. But those 3 jurisdictions are, South Carolina is a big one too, considered some of the most valuable jurisdictions for victims. So even though somebody may live in a particular state, if we represent them, we want to file that case in the state that's most valuable for the client. So even though they may live in a state that has a 1-year statute of limitations, their case could be filed in Minnesota, for example, that has a 6-year statute of limitations. So I don't want the listeners out there to get caught up on what their state statute is, because there may be a longer one that applies. If they are concerned, think 2 years, and or just go the minimum, California, 1 year from date of death. But I can tell you there's people who died 10 years ago who we can file a case for. And there's a guy who died about 25 years ago who would be about 125 if he were still living today, who we recently got about a $900,000 settlement for. So
Wow.
you don't want to think that, hey, if somebody just, it's got to be the last year, because there are workarounds to the statute of limit. Not always. Some cases, people call me, your statute's blown, can't get you any money. But there are workarounds.
You and I have talked about the movie. Is it Aaron Brockovich? Is that right?
That's the one.
And it's supposed to be pretty true. Why did so many people not want to file, even though they were sick?
I think that's a good question. And I think what I see a lot is, a lot of these people live in what's known as, and they don't really have these anymore, but you'd call them company towns, where really the whole town, the biggest employer in that town is the company. Like,
Ah,
say it was
yes,
General Motors. And these people, look at these companies and say, look, they've given me a job for 25 years. They have, given me health insurance, helped me raise my kids and my family, helped me buy a house. um, I don't want to sue this company. They
right,
looked out for me for 30 years. In the field, we call it, he's a company man, and even though this company may have harmed him in some way, and I'm going to add to this, and even though the company may have harmed him, they don't want to sue and go after the company, because they worry, hey, my brother still works for that company. Are they now going to fire him? Are they going to worry about, my friends? Are they going to fire, some of these people are still working. Are they going to fire me? Are they going to cut off my pension? And they're so concerned. But what people don't understand and I've worked on some of these cases, but we can't even go after employers in our cases. That's what's known as a workman's comp case. And we don't file
right,
workman's comp cases. Our cases are considered product liability or personal injury cases. We're going after the manufacturers, suppliers, distributors of asbestos products, the companies who mine the fiber, who sold the fiber to the asbestos companies. These are typically the companies that we go after. We can't even sue employers. And when we do, they file a motion and they get out of the case immediately. So I think once people understand that it's not the employers we go after, and I think in Aaron Brockovich, that was the case, that it was going,
right.
I think it was a PG&E or whichever big power,
Yes,
it
yes,
was the big power company that they were going
yes.
after. So,
But
one
I
of these people.
understand. It makes sense why the people would be afraid. That makes so much sense.
Oh, and they live in the company housing. These
Yes,
companies, I mean, it was the whole town. They were the biggest employer. They owned the markets, the stores, everything in the whole town. And so now these people, are concerned about that. And so that
Michael,
is what I suspect.
do you ever have to deal with whistleblowers?
Um, Well, I hesitate only because in a lot of ways I feel like I have to act as a whistleblower in my own
Yes.
field, and that's what's unfortunate. So if you mean dealing with myself, yes. And when I say that, these asbestos trusts that I just mentioned formerly had $70 billion in them for victims, and now have $20 billion in them. My question has always been, where did that other $50 billion go? And I
Yeah,
think
right.
probably about half of it legitimately went to victims, but the other half, I've got some grave concerns that there has been some significant whistleblower worthy conduct that has taken place. But other than that, I haven't seen it yet in my field. I do wish that I have never seen it for these companies where, somebody steps up for the company and says, yeah, my company was doing this and they were a horrible company and they were, of course, in litigation, when you do what we call a PMK or a person most knowledgeable depot of these companies, they've got to produce the person most knowledgeable. So when you ask the person most knowledgeable for, say, I don't know, Dow Chemical about what they did, they are required to tell you. And if they are, and usually there's paperwork and documents related to it. So I wouldn't call them whistleblowers, but I would more say they are, God, what's the word you're looking for? Like it's in poker, it's like, oh, you're ace in the hole. I guess
Oh,
they're
okay.
they are sort of the ace in the hole that you have, because they do oftentimes have to blow the whistle on how terrible their companies were.
Millie in San Diego wants to know how long should the entire legal process take? But that depends on every case is different, right?
It does, but somebody's got mesothelioma, the most significant asbestos disease. We hope that they see 90% of their compensation within 12 to 18 months max. Those cases move quickly. Um, the thing about our cases is you're getting checks the entire time. Different companies,
Mm.
different trusts settle. So, if you're just saying, hey, how long does the whole case take? Let me just give an estimate of, say, 2.5 to 3 years on average for a case. But throughout that time, these clients are getting compensation, say 6 months after we start, and then they might get another check a month later, another check a month later, another check 2 months later, and there's constantly checks coming in throughout that 3 years. But that also being said, there really is never closing a case, because I mentioned there is that $20 billion in trust funds.
Mm.
If there is some of that money left over, more than anticipated, they are going to give old victims additional monies. So if I closed a client's case and they got some more money from one of these trust funds, if I close their case and they're not my client, I have to send the money back to the trust. So if I leave their case open, even though 98% of it is settled, then there's still a chance that somebody like this client that I had mentioned earlier died 25 years ago. If we closed his case 25 years ago when he died, then, which was 3 years after it started, then he never would have gotten this $900,000 check. So we never actually close a case, but think 2.5 to 3 years, Millie. So thank you for the question.
Here's one from Fort Lauderdale. How quickly, well, this is you kind of answers, how quickly after the process has begun should a patient expect to start seeing checks? You kind of
I'd
went
say
over that.
After the diagnosis within 90 days. What takes us a lot of time is getting our clients' medical records. Someone's got lung cancer, just ordering a pathology report or getting a disc. These facilities make us jump through so many hoops. There's not one standard medical release. So just getting the records. But once we've got a diagnosis within, say, 90 days, they definitely should start seeing money. It's just how long it's going to take us to get that diagnosis is the key. If someone's got mesothelioma, that's a diagnosis. So the second that one comes in, I'd say that person's going to start seeing money immediately. And not only will that person start seeing money immediately, if they wanted an advance on their settlements, I would give it to them immediately given their situation.
Oh, here's a good question. This is from Michael in Baltimore. He wants to know, is the settlement taxable?
Great question, Michael. And here's your answer. No.
Wow.
No. There is a separate box on tax forms for personal injury settlements. And when you take a step back and you think about it, we pay tax on income. We pay tax on income. We work, we get a check, that's income. You know, you get your paycheck, that's income. That's what we pay tax on. Separate from income is a personal injury or a wrongful death settlement. Clients, while they may have to put it on their tax form, they do not have to add it to their income. They do not have to pay taxes on it. The check they get from us goes right into their bank account and they're free to spend it as soon as it cashes. No tax.
Here's a talcum powder question. A friend of mine hired a law firm that did not pursue the talcum powder claims on behalf of my friend, but the patient used talcum powder. What options does a patient have? Does that mean they just don't have a claim?
Well, it's an interesting question, and obviously there's a lot of facts there. You know, that person, I would have to wonder to what extent they had other exposures to asbestos, you know, what their other exposures to asbestos were in addition to the talc exposure. You know, did they work in a shipyard, construction, a power plant? So they had lots of asbestos exposure where the talc could have been considered de minimis. As a lawyer who has been involved extensively in these talc related asbestos cases, I am going to say that the best talc cases are for individuals who have mesothelioma. Those are the those are the only ones that have been proven in the asbestos related litigation. And that would be mesothelioma cases. A talc related lung cancer case, because remember, there's only one thing that causes mesothelioma, asbestos. In that case, asbestos contaminated with talc. Lung cancer cases, more challenging. As we know, there are a variety of things that can cause lung cancer. Smoking, asbestos, chemicals, fumes, just a variety of things. So it's a much tougher case when you're bringing a talc-related lung cancer case vis-a-vis a talc-related mesothelioma case. If her friend was a mesothelioma victim, I would hope that the talc-related component was investigated because those are very good and very big cases today. But if it was not lung cancer, I mean, not mesothelioma, I think it's probably understandable that the law firm focused on the asbestos exposures, not the talc contaminated with asbestos exposures. I think that's reasonable.
Here is Michael in Newark. Hey, I am so glad there's a show like this on. I think people are uneducated by just watching a 60-second commercial. Thank you so much for having such a great expert on. Does your expert think that asbestos companies knew of the danger?
I don't think I know. I know. And, the standard is knew or should have known. And they, we're all members of different, I think it's the Industrial Hygiene Foundation was a big trade group, the Industrial Safety Council. And so 95% of these companies would have a representative go to their meetings in the 60s and 70s. And the dangers of asbestos and asbestos exposure were topics way back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's, most of them definitely knew, but especially when the standard is knew or should have known, it's unquestionable today, looking back, that they definitely should have known. And in fact, many knew. The biggest asbestos companies in the first big trial, there was a book written by Paul Brodeur. I think I've mentioned it in an earlier one. I think it's called Unreasonable Misconduct or something like that, but Brodeur. And Johns Manville and their insurance companies, MetLife, they studied their workers and they had the data, and they literally, took the data and swept under the rug. And they said, no, it causes a non-fatal disease called silicosis. And so the biggest companies definitely knew, and they were supplying the fiber to all the other companies. And so the knew or should have known standard, the answer is absolutely yes. And that is truthfully one of the reasons why we can get compensation from them, because they knew.
Well, Michael, I always tell you, your show goes by so fast. Tell people how they can reach you. I know we're showing your phone number and your website on YouTube, but there's so many people listening on radio right now.
Well, thank you. We do have a call center at 1-800-970-DUST. 1-800-970-DUST, a 24/7 call center for victims of asbestos-related diseases. And then again, scrolling through there is my mesothelioma.pro website. And my email address is my last name, Mandelbrot, Mandel, D as in door, ELBROT, at asbestoslegalcenter.org. All one word. Feel free to email or call me anytime. Thank you.
Michael will be back again with us next month, as always. Michael, thank you so much. Have a wonderful holiday, and I'll see you next year.
Sounds great. You as well, Steve. Have a happy new year, and happy new year to all the listeners. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy. That's attorney Michael Mandelbrot. That's it for us today. We will be back again with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.